Hey, Nick Smith, we're out in Sonoma County at our national sales meeting doing a big kickoff, and part of the fun this week is getting to interview some of the top tech companies in the media and entertainment industry, and so why not bring in probably the biggest and the best when it comes to hard drives and have Seagate here. So Mr. Mark Anderson's here with me today. Talk a little bit about Seagate. Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks
good
for
to have
having
you
me.
back.
It's good to be here.
Well, it's Sonoma. I mean, look at that. It's
I know,
beautiful.
it's
the audience can't see this, but it's like gorgeous outside.
Yep. Yeah. Hurricane 2024 has passed.
Well, I know. I heard it's in LA right now.
It is in LA right now.
Yeah,
I'm coming home to it.
Oh, good. Well, that's why you're here right now.
Exactly.
That's perfect.
Exactly.
So speaking of big things, Seagate dropped a pretty massive hard drive in the last couple weeks. Tell me about this thing. I mean, 30 terabytes?
Correct. Yeah. So we announced our Mosaic. We call it Mosaic 3 Plus. This is our whole new line of high-density hard drives. It's basically a whole new brand around this technology called HAMR, which is heat-assisted magnetic recording. And the 3 Plus means we're having 3 terabytes per platter in the drive. So our high-capacity drive platforms all have 10 platters per drive. So that's 30 terabytes when you have
So
three.
is this thing like, 3 feet tall or something?
It's in your standard 3.5-inch form factor.
Got it.
And that's actually a standard platform that we've been on for years now. And for that matter, not just us, but our competitors have been on a 10-disk platform for quite a while in terms of those highest capacity points. So like our current 20s and 22s and 24 terabyte drives, those are all built on a 10-disk platform. With this, we've just utilized this new technology, which treats the data the same way, but enables you to essentially write the data more densely in the same footprint on that platter. So we're now
getting to that massive capacity at 30 terabytes. Now, is this something we're going to see in consumer, desktops, or is this going to be more for the enterprise large chassis?
So we will see it eventually. I mean, later this year. I should say later this calendar year, we'll see it in drives across our line. Now, granted, obviously there's only a certain segment of people who are going to want to or be able to use 30 terabytes in a disk. Yep. But we will see it even in our things like our NAS line and others. But currently, the only way that your customers can buy it is in our core vault, our high capacity chassis.
Really designed for those high dense chassis to build out. And so that's going to allow you, because your chassis are 64 to 130 disks?
In this specifically with core vault, it turns out to be 96 disks.
Okay, so 96 disks. So at 30 terabytes, now we're talking a massive capacity in a very small footprint.
Correct.
Okay, so which really brings us into sort of Seagate's mission right now to enable more storage in a smaller space for the enterprise, which plays into a lot of different areas from NASs to SANs to a little bit of everything. So talk to me about sort of the roadmap for Seagate right now in building out Core Vault.
Sure. So, well, first of all, it's all about efficiency, right? And creating basically the best TCO products that you can get, total cost of ownership. Essentially best value products you can get for your storage dollar, and that includes even in terms of the cost of energy consumption and other things as well that all feed into that TCO number, right? Getting as dense as you can in that footprint, but also enabling other pieces of architecture that can also help save TCO. Because the big advantage with Core Vault isn't just these big disks and having 2.5 petabytes in 4 rack units. It's actually the fact that it also enables you to reduce the amount of compute you need to drive the file system. Because your typical large scale, whether it's scale up with ZFS or scale out file systems with things like Ceph as an open source, or their proprietary there are other software file systems or object storage systems, I guess, that like Swarm that enable you to scale out and typically rely on one processor core per device that's connected.
So this is really interesting because I think this leads into a kind of an overall evolution of how we look at cloud, right? Because I think for so many years that scale would have taken up, what you're doing now in such a small space would have been 1, 2, maybe even 3 racks of space.
Right.
So the cost the cost of ownership, the cost to power it, the cost to maintain it, all that was so expensive that cloud really became relevant because of that. Because then I'm putting that on somebody else, right? It sort of becomes, oh, that's like, why bother building this when I can just rent it from, say, Amazon or somebody? Now that cost and that capacity and the total ownership you're talking about has come so far down, it makes more sense now for customers to say, why am I not being my own cloud provider? Why am I not building it back on-prem, stop renting it, kind of own it? Which is good and bad for you guys, because you not only are enabling that, but you do have a cloud product as well.
Correct.
Which I'm assuming is fundamentally built on the same architecture.
Essentially, yeah. And it's really more, what I'd say with customers is where people are starting to look is, and this is a great thing, is actually, where does it make the most sense to have the data? Because there was a big, everybody was on-prem, obviously, for a long time.
Yep.
And then there was, especially with COVID and the pandemic, there was a huge swing of the pendulum and a huge move to just get everything on the cloud, right? And now we're getting a lot of customers with buyer's remorse as they've gotten those cloud bills. And now we're,
Well, and those cloud bills the more you utilize the cloud, the more the bill goes up. Right? And in general speaking, that's sort of the opposite when we think about how we buy tools. You buy a car, the longer you drive it, the cheaper it gets to drive, right? And the same thing can be said for owning your storage, right? The longer you use it, the lower the cost of it has become. And that's not so true with cloud. On that side. So now that we're seeing these capacities grow, the chassis get denser, the software requirements or the CPU requirements kind of come down, we can start building out and maximizing the amount of rack space at such a much lower cost. It makes so much sense for somebody to go, I really shouldn't be all in on the cloud. And I think that's a thread you and I talk about of sort of this process of tiering, of not being all in on one or the other, which leads me to your guys' venture into cloud and what you're doing on the cloud side right now. So talk to me about live.
Absolutely. So with live cloud, and kind of taking a thread, or kind of pulling on that thread that you were talking about, because it's not just about on-prem versus cloud, or taking, I want this data on-prem and this data in the cloud. You even need to look at kind of an overall strategy and both hybrid cloud strategy. So having what makes sense, what processes, what data makes sense to keep on-prem, what data makes sense to keep in the cloud. But even when you're talking about that data in the cloud, where do I put it in the cloud? It's really multi-cloud that you want to think about. Because, for example, with Live Cloud, we have a completely predictable cost. And that's what really sets us apart from everyone else, is that we don't have any fine print, no hidden costs, no ghost bytes that you're paying for.
Okay, ghost bytes is an interesting one. Let's attack that for a second. I think that's sort of a newer term we're hearing out there that people are talking about. So explain to the audience what a ghost byte is.
So a number of cloud providers, as soon as you put data up there, even if you want to delete it or you think you delete it, you're paying for it for a minimum period of time, 90 days. So even if I only needed that data there for a very transient period, I'm still stuck paying for that capacity that data is taking up.
This is like 1980s blockbuster rental. I did the 2-day rental. I finished it in 3 hours, but I still got to pay for the full 2 days. Right? And it doesn't matter when I return it, unless I keep it longer, and then it extends another 2 days. And,
exactly.
Yeah, and the bill just keeps getting bigger.
Exactly, and it just feeds into all of those little things that you weren't really expecting to pay for, and getting back to that unpredictability of cost. So with us, you're paying for, let's say you got a reserve capacity model. I'm paying for a petabyte of storage in the cloud. Well, all you're paying for is what's actively all you're paying for is that petabyte of storage. You can have on there whatever you want. If you could put 200 terabytes on there today and delete those 200 terabytes tomorrow, and replace it with a whole different 200 terabytes, and we don't care. You're just paying for that 1 petabyte that you've committed to for storage.
So it's good to go from that point forward.
It's good to go from that point forward. You know exactly what your bill will be.
Oh, no, and I think that's the strongest, because it's so hard to predict costs in the cloud otherwise. Right, and I think that's what's driving a lot of people back to on-prem. But I think it's just kind of extending this storyline a little bit. You made a really good point. It's about deciding where you're putting what, right? Do I need it in the cloud? Do I not need it on cloud? Am I distributing the file? Am I having third-party software applications touching the file, right? And so being able to have that flexibility of saying, look, I'm going to only put what's needed up there and keep everything else down here on-prem where I can own and control my costs.
And likewise, there even, I mean, that's not, and I'm not saying don't work with other cloud providers. There may be certain things that make sense with those cloud providers, but you can think of Live Cloud as like your cloud backplane. This is where you put all your stuff. And then let's say you have some process that AWS does really well that you want to use. You can either have point AWS right at Live Cloud, at your data in Live Cloud, and do the processes, and you only pay the ingress and egress on the data that it's essentially moving in and out, or I should say pulling out, you'll pay the ingress on, and the data that's being processed, and you feed the output back into your Live Cloud data set, you're paying the egress on. But you're not paying all the ingress and egress on everything else that you have.
Right.
And
there's something to be said for looking at some of those file movement applications. A lot of times we feel like we got to spin up and be in the cloud to distribute. But if you're not processing, you're just distributing, there's this opportunity to actually distribute from on-prem, where you control your internet fees, you control your egress and fees. I mean, it's just one more layer of kind of taking out the, like, can I save a little bit more money, right? Can I not charge myself as much? Do you think that, you know, as we kind of look at this movement back onto prem, I mean, we've shrunk the amount of size we need to get these traditional, like these amazing capacities. Has it gotten easier, do you think, with the newer software vendors, with the newer HSMs, to run and own your own product on-prem?
I'd say yes, but it depends. I mean, there's always going to be factors that, right? It all comes down to predictability. That's where you're always going to benefit. Where on-prem is going to be the strongest is wherever you can predict the workload and the storage. Because there your cost per terabyte, if you know how much you're going to need to store, or if you know how much compute you'll need to do this process, and it's a fixed regular process, then in that case on-prem, you'll never beat it.
Got it.
But when it's the variability that causes issues, because suddenly, you know, I get this big project and I suddenly need 500 terabytes more capacity because I have, you know, I've maxed out my on-prem storage, and to fit in this new project that I just got, I need to figure out a way to suddenly handle
grow
this,
capacity.
to grow capacity. And that's where the HSMs can help with this, with cloud, and flex out to cloud as like and again with like a Live Cloud, where you're not going to be paying all the other stuff and you're not paying to hold your data hostage. It allows you to flex out into that, you know, other space that you're not having to hold on to all the time.
So even if I wanted to say get rid of cloud, there's still a space for it. There, you know, being your own cloud provider just means you're lowering your, you know, your sort of your top line, but there's still that opportunity to burst and to grow. Now, Core Vault's got some interesting feature sets in there for sort of data repair, for expansion. Talk to me a little about, because I think that goes into, if I do want to expand on-prem, how do I get to that? How do I grow? And how do I maintain my data sort of continuity?
So Core Vault itself, it's funny because it is and isn't expandable. You expand a Core Vault by buying another Core Vault, but the TCO with Core Vault is so low that there's really nothing beating it. And there are different ways to architect it. And getting back to that, I mean, you can fit into so many different file systems, but again, the big advantage is it's presenting as LUNs instead of devices. So I don't need to spend as much on compute as I would if I were doing the same kind of architecture with a JBOD or you know, more traditional architectures.
So where are you finding this falling into place? Like, what types of workflows, what type of customers? Who's saying to themselves right now, I really need to do this, you know, direct myself? So
multiple places. I mean, people who need, first of all, just think of it as a big bucket of storage, right? And what do I use big buckets of storage for? Nearline, archive. So even tape replacement. I mean, the TCO for Core Vault is rapidly approaching that of tape, just because we're able to essentially get so much into a relatively small space, and keep the cost to the customer down on all of it. And you have the added benefit of, well, I should say, especially when you figure in the soft costs of tape. migration costs,
Yep.
manpower, all the other stuff that goes into really maintaining that data over a period of time.
But so I want to pull on that thread a little bit because to coin your term, this concept of tape replacement, right? A lot of times people look at like the cost of a tape and they're like, oh, well, the tape is only $100 and it's X number of terabytes.
Yep.
And it's going to last forever if I stick it on the shelf. Well, that's provided you have a drive to read it forever.
Yep.
Provided there's no tape, you haven't destroyed the tape in pulling data on and off of it over the years.
Yep.
And provided you don't decide to migrate to a new platform,
Yep.
right? You don't decide to move to a new version of the tape.
Provided, by the way, that you have someone periodically pulling the tape off the shelf and putting it in a drive.
Warm it up and ensure data is there.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I think people kind of look at this tape and go, oh, this thing is such a sweet spot in terms of capacity and price and performance and and longevity, but then they don't look at the actual maintenance costs. And in doing so, and then there's the 3 to 5 year, do I migrate to the next version and increase my capacity in my library? Whereas when we look at sort of moving this to object or to effectively onto a Core Vault platform, I lose all of that. It's gone. It's accessible, and and one of the things as you and I discussed Core Vault, if a drive goes out, I can replace it with a newer drive. My data is still there. I haven't lost anything. But you guys have this ability to use different drive sizes.
Correct.
Talk about that, because that's very unique in a storage environment. Everything's got to be the same all the time. Right?
So since Core Vault's actually using an erasure coding scheme, it allows you to mix drive capacities, which enables us. It's actually, in terms of everyone going green, right, and looking to be as efficient as possible, it's something that's allowing us to actually be more efficient and less wasteful. It's kind of a little known secret within the hard drive industry that there's actually a certain amount of capacity waste with hard drives when hard drives are produced, because everything that comes off a hard drive production line is not that 20 terabyte or 18 terabyte or 14 terabyte drive that you think you're getting, or that I should say that you think you're getting, that you're paying for. Because what's happening is it's coming, that 20 may be coming off as 20.5 terabytes, and off the same line you may be getting some that are 18.3 and some that are 19.2.
So traditionally, would those have been thrown away?
They would get reformatted down to the next logical capacity. So you're losing whatever that little increment is between that capacity and the next higher logical capacity, and literally there is wasted space on the drive that has to be wasted because traditional RAID systems have to see all the same drive capacities. You've got to have
all 18 terabyte, all 22 terabyte. They only work if everybody is equal in size.
Essentially, yeah. And so what Core Vault allows us to do is to actually be able to take, and we call it variable drive capacity. We can take every drive that comes off the line, however it comes off, and stick it in there. And we're guaranteeing that you get at least that capacity, that 2.5 petabytes that you're paying for. Yeah. You actually may get more, and it'll just be transparent to you, and it'll be thrown in as extra overhead.
Which is amazing, because as we move forward, that actually expands the life cycle of that chassis. Because 18s may not be available in 3 to 5 years, so now I'm putting 20s, 22s, 30s, whatever is available. So rather than having to buy a complete new chassis and start over again, you've got that flexibility.
Yeah, but and by the way, in the same technology, that same erasure coding scheme, we call it Adapt, is available in all of our RAID systems. So it even adds a really cool capability to our other RAID systems, which is that I can also expand. So the Core Vault is not expandable. You can't throw a JBOD onto a Core Vault to add more later. You just buy another Core Vault. But with our RAID systems, you can expand them.
Got it.
And so let's say today I buy a system that's fully loaded with 22 terabyte drives, because that's the biggest I have available currently. Tomorrow, or well, let's say a year from now, we're shipping 24 terabyte drives, or whatever it is,
or eventually 30s,
eventually 30s. I can buy a JBOD that has those drives in it, and as long as I'm using Adapt, I can plug that right in, basically increase the size of the disks, increase the number of disks in the disk pool, and grow the
overall capacity.
Yeah, no,
that's brilliant.
And it's all And it doesn't care. All it cares about is the available space that's connected to it.
It's interesting to hear a storage company because when you hear people talk about, green storage technology, it's always about power and heat and thermals, right? And we don't talk about the waste. I think a lot of times in the tech industry, we don't talk about the waste.
Right.
We don't talk about the materials used. We don't talk about, we try to focus on the things that are more relevant to the customer using it than to the overall environmental impact of producing it. And it's awesome to hear a manufacturer talk about, look, we're trying to think about our, how we're saving the earth all the way back to the construction side and utilizing more of the materials and getting more efficiency out of them versus just saying, oh, we use less electricity, so therefore it creates less thermals. Yay, we're done. Right? So it's awesome to hear that. So I appreciate it. Tell the engineers thank you from me.
Of course. Of
Oh,
course.
good. Well, listen, man, this has been exciting. I love always getting to chat with you because I always learn something about storage whenever we do. So tons of fun having you here. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
That's going to be all of us from NSM 2024. This has been Mark from Seagate, and I'm your host, Nick Smith. We'll see you all in the next episode.